Hello everyone, and welcome back to another ArcGIS Pro tutorial video. And in this tutorial video, I want to wrap up our discussion on labels by talking about how to create, manage, and manipulate annotation labels. So at the end of the previous video, when we set up these dynamic labels with two different label classes, I said that there might be a situation, say for example with the Puspatuck Reservation, where you might want to make this into one line of text instead of two. And I said that because dynamic labels pretty much only let you edit all of the labels, there's not really a good way to do individual label editing. This is something you would have to accomplish with annotations. So in this video, I want to show you how to convert these to annotations, what the conversion process does and does not do relative to the data set, as well as how we can manipulate the annotations once we've created them. So first things first, how do we actually take these labels and convert them to annotations, and what does that do? Well, in order to convert labels to annotations, the first thing that we have to do is we have to make sure that we have the labels set up. So you can't create annotation labels without first creating dynamic labels, okay? So if we create an annotation set, it will basically mirror this exact label setup at this exact scale in perpetuity, but it will allow us to make changes to the individual labels after the fact. So let me show you what I mean. So right now we have these labels that we made in the dynamic labeling episode previously, and if we were to right click on towns, which is the labels that we want to create annotations for, you'll see that there's a convert labels to annotations button. And if we click that, you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen here, or on the right-hand side of the screen here, we have the geoprocessing pane pop back up with the Convert Labels to Annotation tool. And basically what this is going to do is this is going to duplicate everything that we have here in terms of labels and create what's called an annotation. So you'll see here that we want to use the main element, that's the map that we're working with. We want to convert just one layer. We want to convert towns. So this is going to, again, take exactly what we have here, set up color, size, halo, everything, and it's going to convert that to what's called an annotation. Now here's the key thing to remember here. The key thing to remember is this conversion scale. So you'll notice that right now the conversion scale matches the scale that we're at right now. So what that means is that the text is going to stay this size is based on this scale, no matter what we do after the fact. Now I know that might not make sense, but in just a second you'll see what I mean. It's going to ask for an output geodatabase. I typically stick mine in whatever geodatabase I'm working in, or if I don't have one prepared, I use the default geodatabase that was created. The suffix, this is what it's going to put on sort of the beginning to designate that it's an annotation. You can change this if you want. I typically keep anno just because that way I know it's an annotation. It's going to ask what you want to name the layer. I'm going to name this towns anno. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this create feature linked annotation, if I check this, what that will do is that will create what's called a feature-linked annotation, which is what the name says. What that does is that links these annotations back to the data set so that if I change a name or add a piece of data or delete a piece of data, the annotations will automatically update. Now here's a note on that, because that sounds like that's something you would want to do every single time, but here's an important thing. In order for this to run, the data set that we're working with would have to be in the same geodatabase that we're putting the annotations. Okay, let me repeat that. In order for a feature-linked annotation to work, the annotation and the data have to be in the same geodatabase. Okay, and in this case, our towns here was a shapefile. It's not even in a geodatabase. So if I were to try to create a feature-linked annotation right now, this whole thing would crash because the data is not in a geodatabase, let alone the same one that I'm trying to put annotations into. The other half of that is that annotations have to go into a geodatabase, right? It says output geodatabase. It cannot be a file folder. It has to be a geodatabase. There's no shapefile equivalency of an annotation. So everything's set up. We're doing towns. This is the same scale that we have here. We're taking all of these features as they look now, and we're going to create an annotation layer. Okay. So right now, it doesn't look like anything happened. And that's okay. If I zoom in a little bit more, you'll notice that something's happened. You'll notice that the size of the annotations, the labels, no longer changes. That's what I meant when I said that the annotations are stuck to that scale. They will never change size. They're going to stay that size no matter what scale we zoom in and out to. That's the downside of working with an annotation. They're no longer dynamically linked to the scale of the data. Now, I'm actually a little surprised. I would have thought the labels would have turned on. Let's turn labels back on, just to show you what happens. So you see how, in this case, the labels are changing in size. That does not happen anymore with the annotations. So let's go ahead and turn that off. So let's zoom back out to our intended scale here. Just going to do this really quick so that we're working where we want to work. Okay. Now, the whole impetus of this was to take and edit these annotations individually, maybe change their placement, maybe change the size slightly, right? In order to do that, we have to be having the map pane selected. We have to go to the Edit tab, and then over here in Tools, you'll see we have the Annotation, or if you click down, Annotation, right? And you'll see here that my cursor is now thicker with a little cat with a small capital A. That's telling me that I can interact with annotations. So if I click on an annotation, you'll notice two things. First of all, the right-hand side of the screen tells me that I've selected an annotation. We have this little box down here that's going to allow me to edit the text, so I can do things like change color, font size, make it bold or italic, increase or decrease the font size, and change the font family. You'll also notice that it is bounded by a box. This allows me to do two things. One, I can move it around. Two, I can actually resize the box and it will dynamically update the size of the text. Now I don't want it to be that large, so I can actually highlight it and go back to 10. Ooh, whoa, not 113, that's way too much. Go back to 10. But what I can do is if I hit backspace and space, you'll see that I've taken out that character return and now it's all one line, and I can sort of replace it back where I wanted it. So now you'll see that I've taken what was originally 2 lines, made it 1 line. Now here's the nice thing about using annotations as opposed to using the graphic text, is that even though it's no longer connected size-wise in terms of scale, it's at that fixed scale, it is still connected to the data. I can scale around and it moves with it. And you'll see that it holds true over here as well. If I were to activate the tab, I can move it around and it still stays true to the data. Now I do want to make one point about annotations, and that's this idea of the map frame in the layout view. I'm going to go ahead and go back to map or analysis, sorry, edit annotation. I want to actually edit this annotation. So I'm in the layout view editing the annotation right now, and I want to show you what happens if I try to move it outside of the map frame. You'll see that it actually disappears. And I think I can make this a little more clear. Let me, oops. previous extent. There we go. I actually want to close activation for a second. And what I want to do is I want to resize the map frame a little bit. And I want to show you that we have all of this space over here, right, in the actual layout. And let's say for some reason we really wanted this label over here outside of the map frame. With the graphic text, that was no problem. With dynamic labeling, we couldn't actually move the individual labels. With annotations, we can move the individual labels, but watch what happens when I try to move it outside of the map frame. So again, we're going to right-click, activate. We're going to go to Edit, Annotation. I'm going to click on that annotation, and you'll see that I've got it highlighted. I can move it around. Now watch what happens as I try to put it outside of the map frame. You'll see that it disappears. Okay? That is another key thing to keep in mind with annotation labels, is they cannot be placed outside of the map frame. They will disappear. Hopefully this all made sense. I know it was a lot. Annotations take a lot of getting used to, but you can hopefully see the power that you get when you have everything sort of finalized in using annotations to fine-tune some of your labels individually. Hopefully this all makes sense, and if you have any questions, as always, please reach out. Thank you.